I'm going to read two readings, just so as you get the best out of the Word this evening. I'm going to read from Numbers chapter 16, because a lot of people don't know this. And I'm going to read from verse 1 through to the end of verse 7, and then I'm going to turn over, and I'm going to read from verse, 28 to 35. 16, Numbers 16. You can use your device or use your Bible or just listen. Here's how it reads. Korah, son of Ishar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, and certain Reubenites, Dathan and Abiram, sons of Eliab, and On, son of Peleth, became insolent and rose up against Moses. With them were 250 Israelite men, well-known community leaders who had been appointed members of the council. They came as a group to oppose Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You've gone too far. The whole community is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is with them. Why then do you set yourselves above the Lord's assembly?" When Moses heard this, he fell face down. Then he said to Korah and all his followers, "In the morning the Lord will show who belongs to him and who is holy, and he will have that person come near him. And the man he chooses he will cause to come near him. You, Korah, and all your followers are to do this. Take censers and tomorrow put fire and incense in them before the Lord. The man the Lord chooses will be the one who is holy. You Levites have gone too far." Now turn over to verse 28. Then Moses said, "This is how you will know that the Lord has sent me to do all these things, and it was not my idea. If these men die a natural death and experience only what usually happens to men, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord brings about something totally new, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them with everything that belongs to them, and they go down alive into the grave, then you will know that these men have treated the Lord with contempt." As soon as he finished saying all this, the ground underneath them split apart, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them with their households and all Korah's men and all their possessions. They went down alive into the grave with everything they owned. And the earth closed over them, and they perished and were gone from the community. Now turn over to the real reading. And the real reading is Psalm 46. But if you're using an English translation, you'll see that it has a little introduction. It is for the director of music of the sons of Korah. All right? God is our refuge and our strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear. Though the earth give way, and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake with their surging. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. God is within her, she will not fall. God will help her at break of day. Nations are in uproar, kingdoms fall. He lifts his voice, the earth melts. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Come and see the works of the Lord, the desolations he has brought on the earth. He makes wars to cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord Almighty is with us, and the God of Jacob is our fortress. Now, I've loved this psalm since I first read it many, many years ago. It's not my favorite scripture. It's not the one that I enjoy most, but it's the one that I've turned to most often for my own use and for the help of other people. And the reason should be pretty obvious. It's a very reassuring psalm. Yet we've got to be aware that not everyone can apply it truly, at least to themselves. This is a psalm that belongs to God's own people. And interestingly, it's specifically marked out for the sons of Korah. And if you know the history of Korah, you'll appreciate just why the psalm was so relevant to his sons. Because as I read way back in the early days of Moses and Aaron, Korah and two other prominent Levites, with the support of a pretty sizable number of community leaders, they criticized and challenged the leadership of Moses and Aaron. And as I read, trying to cut a long story short, in response to their mutiny, the ground under their feet split apart, the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up. And Korah's sons saw it all happen before their very eyes. And it was only the mercy and the grace of God that spurred them the same end, and then led to the appointment of them as singers in the tabernacle of God. I read selected verses from Numbers 16, but you can read the whole chapter and get all the detail. So, having connected the two passages of Scripture and knowing that background, I hope you can imagine why this psalm was dear to the sons of Korah. Psalm 46 is one of the strongest that I know of. It speaks boldly. It speaks boldly of the confidence of God's people, the confidence that the people of God can have. I said can have. Other people build their confidence in other things, in all sorts of things. But believing people rest theirs on the rock of ages. Now, if you were listening carefully to the way I was reading the psalm, you'll have heard me read nothing in this psalm about the courage or virtue of the people themselves. Nor will you have heard me read about their strength or their wisdom. Their confidence is wholly beyond themselves, and there is a wonderful pointer. Though those around God's people may take confidence from who they know and what they have, the believer has a more humble and a sure reliance. The psalm assures God's people of what? Though the earth give way, that's pretty tough stuff. And though the mountains fall into the sea, and though its waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake with its surging, the believer can be undismayed, not because, and this is important, not because our confidence comes from our sufficiency, but because it comes from God, who the psalmist declares is his refuge and strength. And better than that, addressing this psalm to us is our refuge and strength. And my goodness, we need it in the 21st century. The believer is fearless, not because of his or her natural gifting or the grit of their own heart or the firmness of their own will. They are fearless for one reason: because he or she has a God to shelter and uphold that man or that woman. And that's absolutely amazing. And if the believer doesn't fear calamity, it's because he or she trusts in God and God alone. One of the simple little things that you'll notice about this psalm, the psalm begins and ends with God. Always a good place to start. When we start our services on Sundays, I always like God to have the first word and the last word. It always makes me feel better. I mean, this is why we're gathered, isn't it? To worship God. And sometimes, it's nice to give God the first word and God the last word. God is my refuge. God is our refuge, our strength. That's how it starts. The last line is, the God of Jacob is our fortress. And here's the God's honest truth. We may well be weak and timid by nature and physique, and many of us are. Sometimes in our youth, or when we had more energy and youthfulness, we thought we could handle this or that or the other thing. But I'll tell you what, as time passes in life and you begin to feel the frailty of your own flesh and bones, it's amazing how timid that you can grow by nature and physique. But here's the wonderful thing. Whether we're young or middle-aged or getting on in years, God is our refuge and our strength. And the real life truth is, we never know, honestly, we never know what our strength is until our weakness drives us to trust in God's omnipotence. And that's one of the reasons for celebrating difficult times in your life when you may be washed out or even washed up, because it's then that you know the absolute foundering of your own strength, but when you come to discover the very strength of God in your life. We never understand how safe our refuge is till all other refuges fail us. And I'm sad to say, as I look back over my time, I can see too many times when I ran to a refuge of my own construction, and how often disappointment and failure followed. Because the God's honest truth is, our great refuge is God himself. Did you hear what the psalmist said? He said, when the earth is removed and the waters roar with their surging, we hide ourselves in God. Our confidence rests in God. It's easy to say, but it takes a lifetime to learn. But notice next, this confidence is gained by taking hold of faith. Faith's a funny old thing, isn't it? We talk about faith and faith to believe, but faith isn't faith in faith. The only thing that gives faith any kind of strength and depth is the object of your faith. Faith can be false. It's the object of your faith that gives it its validity and its genuineness. Peace, confidence comes to the believer not only by what God is, but listen, this is really important, but what God is to you. What he is to me. And so David writes, God is our refuge and our strength. This God is our God. And we'll never enjoy the greatness and goodness of God if you think of him in some kind of abstract way. You must take hold of him as your own. I know it seems, at least to me, it seems presumptuous for a person to dare to appropriate God. I've been in company at times when I've made kind of statements like that, been very liberal in my, vocabulary about God. And it does seem presumptuous to other people, and I can appreciate why. But yet that's exactly what God invites us to do in this psalm. He actually bids us to take hold of him. What he wants us to know is that he's there for us. Now, that's very, very important, all the more so when we find ourselves in the place between a rock and a hard place. Or when we find ourselves in what the 127th Psalm describes as wit's end corner. I mean, I think more and more people in the 21st century understand that old phrase, wit's end corner. It's a terrible place to be, but so many people are driven there in the time in which we live. But there's a deep peace that comes to us when we know that God is with, just simply knowing that God is with us, that God is backing us. It's not ours. That wonderful confidence and peace is not ours until we take hold of it by faith. We've got to believe that God is there. And we have to exercise that belief through stepping out in faith. The hardest thing to do when you're between a rock and a hard place, Christian and all as you may be, is to actually exercise your faith. And get out of your tizzy, get out of your mind spin, and remind yourself of who you are and in who is your trust. And you encourage yourself in your trust of God. You don't get into a panic and get lost somewhere and go into a down spin. We may believe, well believe, in our minds intellectually that God can do this or that. But you know what? We need to get into the wheelbarrow. We need to get into the wheelbarrow. I've told you this before. It's a true story. Blondin was a Canadian guy, and he used to wheel a wheelbarrow across Niagara Falls from the Canadian side to the American side and back again. And he used to draw thousands of, can you imagine it? Thousands of onlookers. But it was back in the day when there wasn't much other entertainment. And people went in the actual hope that they would see him fall in. But he never did. And on one occasion, he's coming from the Canadian side to the US side, and he's carrying 200 pounds of dirt in his wheelbarrow. Wow. And of course, they're all cheering, on the American side. And I think some of them were probably hoping he was going to tip over. But anyway, he made it across the rope. And they're all cheering and going crazy. And then old Blondin, the character that he was, he simply asked the crowd, "Is there anyone here who believes that I could take a man across in this wheelbarrow?" And of course they went crazy. "Yes, yes, we do." And he pointed to some poor guy close to the front. And he said, "Okay, jump in." That's what faith is. You've got to be in the wheelbarrow. It's not intellectual, looking at the barrow, comparing the skill of Blondin with the challenge that he's facing. You have got to exercise your belief and get into the barrow, or it's no good. And the wonderful thing is, this confidence through faith will be greatly enhanced by the simple factor of having a clear understanding of who God is. We did what do we call the conference? It's Rooted, and it was Behold Our God. And we had a look at some of the attributes of God, and it seemed to be very appreciated and certainly well attended. But it's amazing how few people have really any basic knowledge about who God is. In verse 10, the Lord counsels, he says, "Be still and know that I am God." But how on earth can we be calm and still when our world is falling apart and everyone around you is, on your case? I mean, how does that happen? Somebody's been in the shower that morning and they've given a wash and they put their hand under their arm and feel this massive lump. Or someone's been having problems with their memory and dizziness and falling, and they go to see their physician, and after some time they're diagnosed as having inoperable brain cancer or something like that. It happens every day. That's a real life challenge. The key in the words of this psalm are simple. How can I leave the doctor's office and be still and calm after he's told me the possibility is I've got 3 to 6 months to live, and I'm loving life and I'm not ready to give it up? The psalmist is a wonderful man. His knowledge of God is a real encouragement to you and to me. He says, be still and know that I am God. Knowing God, having a clear understanding of God is vital. I like to read. And because I came from the British Isles, you know, I have to let you into a secret. I read very little American literature. But I was very, very fond of Irish literature and Irish poetry and British literature as a whole. But Alexander Pope, even today, you know, nearly 3 centuries later, was an English philosopher and an essayist. And he urged us, let's listen to the advice he gave. I'm quoting him. Know then thyself. Know then thyself. Presume not God to see. The proper study of mankind is man. Charles Haddon Spurgeon had a different kind of philosophy. And I quote him. He said, when men and women of God make God their study, then they discover in him those things which make him a refuge, listen, for the hours of danger, a strength for days of trial, and a help for emergencies of every kind. Does that sound more like your life? My Christian brothers and sisters, if we were better students of God, how much happier we would be. The greatest blessing and fortification in life comes through a growing knowledge of trust in God. A growing knowledge, I should say, that leads to a deeper trust in God. And I guarantee it, it'll happen for you. How does such knowledge come? It's so simple. It's by listening to God through his word and speaking to God through prayer. Isn't it the most wonderful thing that God has an ear for us? That's what Isaiah encourages us to do. He says, you know, the Lord is not so hard of hearing that he can't hear you. Not surprising, it's listening to God and speaking to God that are among the first targets of the world, the flesh, and the devil, the things that they seek to draw us away from. I know that to be true through experience of pastoral ministry. How many times over the years, in each place I've been, this is the 4th church that I've been in, church members would come to see me with some complaint or challenge or some worry or some problem, and they would tell me about it. And they'd be very good at elucidating on the thing, but whatever I said, I couldn't seem to pacify them or satisfy them and help them, no matter how I tried. They always had some reason why this wouldn't work for them. That's always a sad, defeating kind of a feeling. But then finally, as they prepared to leave, and I always waited till then because there was no winning up to that point. Before they exited the door, I would ask a simple question. Do you know what the question was? When did you last take time alone with God? To simply open the Bible and listen to him and speak to him. And then I would ask, was it a week ago? Was it a month ago? Was it 6 months ago? Was it a year ago? And I think you'd be shocked if I told you some of the answers I got. Then I would read from the Psalms and not let them leave the office before I prayed with them. And I would encourage them to begin reading John's Gospel. Just a little episode each day. Not a chapter, just a little episode. And before they would read, I would suggest, ask God to help you understand, just before you read. And then after reading, speak to God about something you need help with or something that has arisen in the reading. And then ask something that someone else needed help with. And then I would invite them to come back 1 week later and tell me how they were getting along. And you would be surprised how often in the mercy and goodness of God, that was a light and a way that got people through and onto something better. Yes, it's a fact. For believers to have a sure confidence, we need to know our God. And we need to know him through our relationship with him, not our intellect. Though intellect as a Christian is extremely important. Because Christianity is an intelligent faith, and it's not for fools. And I know I'm in very strong ground when I say all of this, because I know that it will be certified to us by our experience, if we will listen to God and talk to God. The God who calls us to be calm and still in the midst of all our turmoil is the God who gave us life. And equal to that, the God who has watched us over every day of our lives. He was the God who was there in every trial, the God who was there in every catastrophe that struck us. The God's honest truth is, never more so than the ones we thought we could never get through. There's been times in my life, as I think there may be times in yours, when it's as if I've heard the devil say, I'm going to whack your head off now. If he could have done that, he would have done it long time ago. But here we are today. Why? Because God was with us and he brought us through every step of the way. And that's why we can trust him tonight, because he's the God who has brought us through everything that has come against us in our past. Even those times when we actually thought in the smallness of our mind that he had abandoned us and we were on our own. We can trust him tonight because he's the God who's been with us through everything in life and has got us through. And it's the same God who's with us now. Brothers and sisters, it's not only by our knowledge of God that we have confidence when trials and troubles come. It's by our life's experience. Life's experience is the best university. It's great to testify that the God we worship, our God, has been a refuge and a help for us in the past. And it's nice to stand here on the 7th of April and look forward and testify that he will be our very present help in the future. But the most important thing of all is this. This psalm drives our confidence in God to know something that we need to be sure of this very evening. That God is right now where we are. We don't have to look over our shoulder. It's gone. Who am I to know what's going to happen in the future? What's important is now. And God promises that he will be our present help in trouble right now where we are, our refuge and our strength. I'm going to finish by relating an experience I had a little while ago. Because I had this, all that I've said up to now, affirmed by a young woman in Modesto at the time when we were remodeling the campus. And I didn't have an office. We were all over in the multi-purpose room, and the kids from the school used the bathrooms, and I was sharing it with Uncle Ryan there and Auntie Pam. So, not having an office, I sat with this woman in her car, and it was in clear view of the church office, or what we were using as a church office, and also the school office. And she told me her sad and horrendous experience at the hands of people she trusted and who were meant to be her protectors. And the reason she wanted to speak with me was to ask why God had not helped her. And she told me as a child how she had called out to God and he had not intervened to help her. And then she told me as a young teenager she had called out to him then. But God never lifted his finger. He never did anything to stop what was happening. And she told me she was angry at God. And she told me she had lost her faith as a child, just as she had lost her innocence. And her anger and pain was evident as she spluttered through flowing tears. I felt totally inadequate. I listened hard until her words dried up and all that was left were rivers flowing down her face. And I did the very best I could with all the gentleness and empathy I could muster. But frankly, and I understand why not, it didn't assuage her anger at God. But it gave me the opportunity to put the blame where it rightly belonged and to give her an assurance about God's mind on what she had endured. And I suggested she may begin reading the Psalms and to let God know exactly what she thought of him. I advised her to hold nothing back. Tell him how you felt, because in your mind he hadn't intervened to stop your hell. And I told her God was big enough to take it. And I made the promise that God would prove himself to her and that he would restore her faith at some time, as he would restore her future. Over the months that followed, I witnessed a significant mental, emotional, and spiritual healing in that young woman. Don't misunderstand me. It certainly won't erase what that child and young woman endured. But by her own profession, it was helping her not to be oppressed and destroyed by it, and to begin to see that she had a future. The last time we spoke together at any length, she again came to see me. And I cannot overemphasize what the Lord has done for that young woman. Here's what she told me. That throughout what happened to her, though it was an horrendous nightmare, she knew now that the only reason she survived it was that God had actually given her the perseverance and the fortitude to get through it. And that's the truth. The things that we experience in this city, as a pastor here in Modesto, the terrible situations that I've been introduced to, are appalling. And usually, things that are inflicted on children, both boys and girls. And I want to ensure every Christian here something very precious about our God. He is not just a present help in trouble. He's a very present help in trouble. And it's not that we don't have other helpers who are good to us. We do. But there are times when others are unable to help us. They're unable to be present, or they don't have the answers, just as I didn't have the answers for that young lady. But it has never, ever been that way with God. He's not only present, he's very present. And the amazing thing is this: he is not only by our side, he is in us. And from the inside out, he has promised to be our refuge and our strength, a very present help in trouble. Yes, I said this is the psalm I've read most often myself and used for others. It's not my favorite psalm, but it is a strong psalm. And every word is an assurance from God that he will not give up on you and that he will not ever not be there for you.